Hello everyone, Lex here again, and it's build update time. Many thanks to you guys that have shown so much interest in the first iteration of this build, but as you can probably guess just by looking at my character, we've undergone some pretty big changes. Off the bat, you can see we have a good chunk of energy shield to help out with tankiness in the endgame, and this comes from some hybrid pieces I've invested into with our equipment. It just made sense to go that route because we're stacking a bit of intelligence anyways to utilize fire spell on hit. We're also making use of temper weapon in a way that isn't pure meme. I don't know how many warrior builds are legitimately using this thing right now, but it serves as a pretty useful support to our resonating shield and more. We'll go over that later in the video. Unlike the last video, I'm not including a leveling portion, so hopefully we'll be able to keep it a bit shorter, but we are going to spend some time talking about what skills I'm using now, new support gem combos, how the passive skill tree is looking, my gear, etc. As always, I'll have a link to my build below in the description box. I'm going to go ahead and use Path of Building this time around. I find that it saves me a lot of time compared to Mobalytics or something, so hopefully you guys are cool with it. Let me know otherwise, but that's enough of an intro. Let's talk about the skills. Alright guys, starting from the top, I'm going to skip over Raise Shield and Mace Strike as I don't really use them. I mean, they've got some placeholder support gems in there, although I would like to find a spot for Rally. I think I'll have to wait for a perfect Jeweler's Orb before I place that somewhere. But we have a lot to talk about with the rest of the skills. Oh, and just as a quick note, in a lot of the gameplay clips, you may see some of the skills not quite match up exactly with what I go over here, but that's because I experimented with several different setups, and this current set of skills that I'm about to talk about is the one that's been feeling the best for me. Starting off with Fire Spell on hit. It's still socketed with Solar Orb. I find having one floating around useful with all three fonts, as you can see socketed here. You are basically just regenning mana and life while also generating rage while one of these is up. And we have Impetus socketed here for more energy generation. I think it takes a while for one of these solar orbs to form if you're using Resonating Shield alone. And unfortunately, I don't think Magma Barrier actually builds up any energy for you, but with Impetus socketed here again, like last time, every time I use Shield Charge, a solar orb casts. Also, the font of Rage gem doesn't always stay here anymore, unlike the last video. We'll talk about why in a bit. I think as an alternative to Impetus, you could socket in Overabundance. That way you can have two orbs up at once and essentially have all of this regen and rage generation cover a larger area, so you don't have to hang around, just one floating orb for the benefits. But I think overall there wasn't enough overlap in the durations to justify it when you have two orbs up at once, at least for me personally when I tested it. So I just went with the increased energy gain from the support gem. Overall, it just felt better to me. And Temper Weapon is now here. I have a bit to say about this. Again, I'm not sure how much this is used or how much it is memed on, but honestly, this is adding a significant amount of damage to my map clearing. It's honestly quite strong. I think the most important aspect of this is that Temper Weapon uses your weapon stats, not your shield, for its damage increase. If you look real quick here, I'll do an example. You can see Temper Weapon's listed DPS right now is almost 8k average damage per use. We switch out the weapon to my old one, and it is now at around 6k per use. However, despite its damage scaling solely with your weapon stats, this ability actually empowers every one of our shield skills aside from Magma Barrier. So Resonating Shield Shockwave in particular will apply this enhanced damage in its entire radius. Temper Weapon deals so much additional damage at times, and don't get me wrong, you should time your Magma Barriers when you can, but sometimes you can just spam Resonating Shield regardless of Magma Barrier timing and wipe out weaker groups pretty quickly, and more reliably get stacks of Scavenged Plating, something you should glance at every now and then while you're zooming to, make sure you're maintaining some stacks. I know the one hesitation about the skill is the channeling time, slowing things down. They recently buffed Temper Weapon so that each strike of the anvil empowers the next 3 attacks rather than 1, but I could still see people raising an eyebrow to this and having to stop every now and then to smith this damn weapon. Yeah, even with the buff, I wish it was a little faster, but what I've been doing is just channeling it for 1 to 2 strikes on the anvil at times and running with it, striking another 1 to 2 times when I can, sometimes in the middle of a fight even. It's a lot faster and doesn't feel like it's impeding you when used this way, in my opinion. Basically, you just don't have to channel the full duration at times, and the strikes you empower are stored until you actually use them, so you can just stock up some empowered attacks as you are traveling across the map, or do the full channel before a boss fight or breach or similar event, between rounds of simulacrums, etc. It takes some remembering, I'd say, but honestly, overall, it's felt very worth it. I don't think I'm coping since there aren't very many other places to throw ascendancy points if I'm not going Smith's Masterwork, that is, but I digress. Let's talk about support gems. So first is premeditation. This will just make all of your skills that are empowered by this, which is almost all of them, again, everything except Magma Barrier, deal 15% more damage. Pretty dang useful. Then we have Primal Armament, which is an interesting way to get a little extra damage on our shield skills from a, usually weapon-specific or strike-specific support gem, so that's kind of cool. Then we have Murderous Intent. This basically gives Culling Strike to all of our skills that are empowered by this, so really useful for the resonating shield spam. You'll just, cull any mobs that are below a certain health percentage. I'll display them again here. And then the last two support gems are a combo I've used before in other builds and on other skills, but we have Fiery Death. Enemies ignited by supported skills have a 60% chance to explode on death, and Ignition. Supported skills have a 100% more chance to ignite. So this is basically me leaning into the role of this ability to help clear mobs, essentially, and during events like breaches or rituals especially, you'll notice that Fiery Death actually puts in a bit more work since you are igniting things, and if you're spamming Resonating Shield, more things will be ignited by Temper Weapon, and more things qualify for Fiery Death, essentially. It's only a 60% chance, but the more mobs that are getting ignited and die, the more that this will go off. And what's extra useful about it is you don't need any stats or anything to boost the damage. It does a lot of damage already. Explosion deals base fire damage equal to 10% of the corpse's maximum life. So this scales essentially with the health of the mob that you kill. So the harder the mob, the harder that explosion is going to hit. Again, you're mostly going to be wiping things regardless with Magma Barrier and Trampletoes and Resonating Shield, but I do find that these explosions do help out sometimes when clearing big groups, so it's definitely significant. And Infernal Cry is next. I'm not going to spend too long talking about this because I've explained how it works in the previous video, but basically in boss fights, program this into your muscle memory, whatever hotkey you have this bound to, but use this before you shield charge. Every time. Sometimes I use it to help clear, but I find that I often don't need the extra support since Resonating Shield, Magma Barrier, and Shield Charge with Trampletoes just wipes the screen and beyond at times. One thing about the support gems though is Ingenuity is here, and this is useful when you're mapping so that you can use this more often. However, I will actually swap this around with premeditation because you definitely want your shield charges to hit harder in the boss fight, and I find that since you're using Infernal Cry before shield charge every time, it just makes sense to have premeditation here so that you're getting that extra 15% more damage from this ability rather than Temper Weapon. Eventually Temper Weapon charges are going to run out throughout the course of a boss fight, and you want that extra premeditation damage to be consistent and reliable on your shield charges. So I'll definitely swap these around before I fight like a boss, but a lot of times these bosses are dying pretty quickly, so honestly it may not matter that much. And these two support gems haven't changed. You can watch the previous video if you want to hear my explanation on those, but I did add Life Tap here because, we're going to go over the passive skill tree in a bit, but we have switched back to using mana, and this can cost quite a bit, so I converted its mana cost to life cost with this support gems. It just kind of makes sense since we're doing something kind of combo-esque before we hit a boss with our shield charge, so it just makes sense to put it here. And Shield Wall is actually here. To be honest, this is not here for its damage, but instead is part of our setup that lets us sort of one-shot bosses. Remember that Font of Rage gem I mentioned earlier? Well, you'll see that there's an empty socket here that I swapped this down to because, well, during a boss fight, they usually have some lengthy animation where they're invincible, and I'd rather stack as much rage as possible before that first big shield charge, so that's the logic here. Shield Wall mostly serves as a rage battery during Pinnacle boss fights, I should say. I don't usually bother doing this, the swapping of the Font of Rage gem around for map bosses, since they are very easily one-shottable without starting, with a bunch of rage. But this setup is for Pinnacle bosses like Zesht, Arbiter of Ash, Chaos Trial Master, etc. Honestly, super useful since we're running Berserk and getting a bunch more damage out of our rage stacks, so super strong for our big shield charges. I also use it out in the field on maps and in the middle of some events if I want to, temper weapon. These things feel like they basically a taunt if you position them correctly. Monsters will attack them while you empower yourself to keep wiping them out. Honestly feels pretty good to use like this, and of course they can now be destroyed by war cries, so you can use them to just assist in your group wiping as well. And as for the other supports, I have Martial Tempo. This has a pretty lengthy animation, so you want to reduce that a bit with this gem. Inspiration, this is also one that costs a lot of mana, so you want to reduce the cost as much as you can. And Physical Mastery, just to give it a little extra oomph. I mean, I know I said it's not for the damage, but I really couldn't find another place where this would fit and add more damage than some of the other support gems I already had socketed, so that's the logic there. Oh, and real quick, I'll mention as a quick note that I like to keep Infernal Cry and Shield Wall close to the top of my skills list, because that's where I'm doing, all the gem swapping. That's pretty much it for the support gem swapping. I know some of of you may not be into that, but for me, I like to play really efficiently. So these two skills are near the top of the list so that I can just swap the gems quickly before a boss fight. And next is Resonating Shield, now one of the star players in all this. I went over this a bit when talking about Temper Weapon, but the Resonating Shield Shockwave alongside Temper Weapon is enough to wipe out formidable groups, honestly. Though when it comes to magic packs and rares, I'd obviously want, to time my Magma Barrier since it does way more damage. However, again, you want to intentionally mistime some of your Magma Barriers and actually crack the armor of some mobs with this ability so that you can keep Scavenged Plating up as much as possible. And this is made all the easier if you animation cancel your Resonating Shield so that it hits much faster. Just check down at your Temper Weapon and Powered Attack count, every now and then, because this will use up charges pretty quickly. And honestly, I only really spam the animation cancel in niche situations, usually when trying to finish off a few stragglers that are going to take too long for a Magma Barrier or something. A lot of the time I'm using the one shockwave here, rolling or repositioning, then using another shockwave, and that's usually enough to wipe out a lot of groups. But I do often double tap the animation cancel, so it is worth learning and will save you a bit of time. You just have to get a feel of when you should use a single shockwave versus a double tap against certain groups, and when either will be enough to wipe them. And again, we have support gems, mostly unchanged from last time. We have Armor Explosion here. This deals fire damage based on the hit that breaks the armor of a target. It's okay here, Resonating Shield doesn't actually hit that hard itself, but it still is fire damage and is boosted by this build, so feels like it's pretty significant. And then we have Rage, which is giving us Rage each time Resonating Shield hits something. This is not per target though. You're just going to get 3 Rage even if you hit like multiple targets with a shockwave, so still worth it though. You're spamming it a lot, you'll build up Rage fairly quickly. And then there's Demolisher, where we're breaking 50% more armor, good against both mobs and bosses. Honestly, you can break boss armor very quickly with this ability. And then we have Magnified Effect. I think this is more of a new one because this has good synergy with Temper Weapon. I wanted the shockwave to hit more targets because then Temper Weapon hits more targets, so that's kind of the reasoning there. And here it is, a big part of what this build hinges on: Shield Charge. Honestly, not a ton to talk about with this from the last video. It is our hardest hitting ability at the moment. Use it to wipe out rares while mapping, or if you've got like god tier timing, use it to Magma Barrier wipe groups, charge through and wipe other groups while mapping. Feels good if you ever get this down. There's one thing I'll mention here though, and I hope this isn't a bug, and if it is, I apologize for potentially revealing it and having GGG fix it, but Shield Charge blocks while you are charging, obviously since it activates Magma Barrier. However, did you know you don't actually build up your stun bar while blocking with Shield Charge? I've actually used it to empty my stagger bar when my character is close to being heavy stunned. I literally just reposition, queue up a Shield Charge that blocks their group of attacks from the front, and you just won't build up any more stun. Again, this feels unintentional, but at the moment it is in the game and is a great way to relieve yourself of stun buildup while still being able to block and dish out damage, during something like Rituals or Delirium maps, or that have rolled monster stun buildup, etc. Or hey, maybe it is intentional. Maybe GGG just wants you to be an unstoppable juggernaut while using this skill, which I can get on board with. And the support gems on this thing are mostly aimed at boosting up the damage as much as possible. We have Exploit Weakness, obviously, which is here from last time. On fully broken armored targets, you'll deal 40% more damage while consuming that effect, so this is mostly here for boss damage. I'll spam Resonating Shield until the boss's armor is fully broken, and then charge with this. I do this like every time, before I shield charge. I always make sure they have fully broken armor. And then we have Concentrated Effect. This is just 30% more area damage while we have 50% less area of effect. The less area of effect is a little unfortunate, but honestly not that big of a deal since we're using Trampletoes to wipe cluttered maps. That's doing most of the heavy lifting as far as our AoE goes. But the 30% extra damage feels really good, so I definitely recommend having this here. And then we have Execute, which means we deal 50% more damage with hits against enemies that are on low life. You may be wondering why exactly this is here, if it's only enemies that are on low life when this 50% damage will kick in. But, if you know the unique that I am wearing and talking about, you can see it right now, you know why this is here. We'll talk about it in a bit. And then we have Rage Forge. Again, on bosses specifically, we will always have enough rage to use this, especially if you just Infernal Cry right before shield charging, because that is socketed in a way that gets us enough rage to use this as long as you hit the boss with the shout. So that's why this is here. It's a free 35% more damage as long as you land a shout on bosses. And then lastly, we have Fire Infusion. Gain 25% of your damage as extra fire damage. Honestly, a huge damage boost if you just look at the numbers. So real quick, our collision is dealing listed about 120k. We remove this, we're now down to around 90k. So we're getting around 30k listed DPS from this one gem. pretty strong. And of course we have Flammability. We've talked about this thing briefly before, and this is something you want to cast on high priority targets like rares and obviously bosses, honestly regardless of their fire resist. Like obviously you want to increase your damage against targets with high fire resist, but also with the way that this is now socketed, we can delve pretty deep into negative resists with just one use of this thing. Again, try to fit this in before you shield charge a boss. It will amplify your damage by a lot. I usually spam Resonating Shield once again to fully break their armor, then I'll Infernal Cry, then I'll cast this, and then I'll cast Shield Charge. That's kind of the combo that I have going on. And if you wanted, you could even Infernal Cry before you spam Resonating Shield and just hopefully you get the Shield Charge off in time, just because Resonating Shield and Flammability do not consume the Warcry empowered attacks, so just something to keep in mind. Alright, well quick, let's go over support gems. Focused Curse will make sure that this thing goes off faster. I think it's definitely very good to do that. Heightened Curse will make the curse stronger, also really good, both pretty much essential in my opinion. And then we have this combo. So you have Burning Inscription, which will ignite the ground based off of your maximum mana, which is good. We want to apply Ignite to things as much as possible. But then we also have Fire Exposure, so we'll also inflict fire exposure on whatever we ignite with this ability. So we're basically getting a curse reduction in fire resistance when we hit a target with this, but also we're inflicting fire exposure with the same ability. You're amplifying fire damage by a lot in one ability. It feels really good. Oh, and real quick, just to avoid any confusion, you actually can't socket in fire exposure without socketing Burning Inscription in first. People have asked me this in previous videos, why can't I socket fire exposure into Flammability? Well, that's because you need Burning Inscription first, because Flammability on its own doesn't actually ignite. Here, I'll actually show you. So if you remove fire exposure, remove Burning Inscription, yeah, you can't socket it. You have to put this one in first. Make sure you put Burning Inscription in first, and then it'll allow you to socket in Flammability, or sorry, fire exposure. All right, and down at the bottom we have all the auras. I don't think I'll spend too much time talking about them as they are pretty straightforward. What I will say is that you don't have to run 4 auras. I just wanted to because it felt like I had an extra skill slot just sitting there and I wanted to make use of it. If you wanted to run a cheaper version of this build, you could invest in less spirit and just run 1 less aura, or maybe just, you know, a few less aura support gems or something. But anyways, let's talk about them a little bit. We'll start with my favorite out of the bunch, Magma Barrier. By now, hopefully you've gotten used to the timing, and it is currently our second hardest hitting ability behind Shield Charge. This is honestly the ability that will help you clear cluttered packs the most, since it'll trigger Trampletoes every time. It's a super strong ability. I have many videos talking about it. I definitely recommend my most recent one if you want to learn more about the mechanics of how it actually triggers and how its cooldown works, etc. But let's go over the support gems real quick. We have Close Combat. This is pretty obvious. This is a close range ability. We deal 25% more attack damage to most things that we hit this with, so pretty strong. Elemental Focus. This is 25% more elemental damage, but we can no longer inflict elemental ailments, so this cannot ignite. You could argue that you want it to ignite, but honestly, I don't think you do. It's mostly our crowd clearing ability, and we have, you know, Trampletoes plus this. The things just get wiped out instantly, and I don't think you're going to get a lot of value out of, you know, having this ability ignite. And then we have Fire Mastery. This skill still scales pretty well with gem levels, skill gem levels, so this is why this is here, just to add another chunk of damage to it. Pretty efficient here. And then we have Reach, just to make it have a bigger area of effect. This will, you know, apply the Trampletoes effect to more targets, just a little bit more. Felt better for clearing, essentially. You know, and there's the reduced accuracy rating attached to this gem, but that doesn't matter for us at all since we're still running Resolute Technique, so we just can't miss. Feels good here. And then we have Scavenged Plating, which we've already talked about. This will give you stacks of armor, which is pretty important. I've become less and less of a fan of armor, but you obviously still need some for the end game, and it is useful in reducing the damage when you're getting mobbed on by a big group of enemies. The Thorns damage isn't super relevant to our build, but it is also still not terrible. I remember letting a few mobs hit me while I was hammering away with Temper Weapon, and I was surprised at how much damage it did without having to, you know, specking or specializing for Thorns in any way. So sort of valuable, but not really, I guess. Only 1 support gem here. We have Persistence. This will make the buff duration on this a little bit longer. It is pretty short, feels short without it, so I do recommend having this here. And the rest of the support gems are socketed into Time of Need. I mean, again, I turned off the aura because it's driving me crazy, but this is here. I've talked about this skill a bunch of times in my other videos, but it's just a, you know, free heal and curse removal that's pretty frequent with this support gem. gem fast forward feels really good. And then we have herbalism, cannibalism, and clarity. Since we're using mana again, clarity is pretty strong, pretty essential at this point. We need to get a little bit of mana regen. And yeah, I mean, these two here are just like essential spirit gems. This will just save your life essentially. And lastly, we have Berserk, basically here to help us get more damage out of rage. Well, technically the tooltip says we get more out of the rage buff itself, increased rage effect. So I don't know if that also boosts things like armor, if you're getting armor per rage stack or something like this, but this is mostly here for the extra damage. We're getting rage all the time while mapping, and we're stacking a bunch of rage before we fight a boss, so it just makes sense to run this aura. I know we're not getting any value out of the lifesteal, but that's okay, we don't really need it, and the health drain is negligible considering that we have other auras and skills socketed. We basically easily out-regen the life drain. And we have one support gem here. We have Vitality, regenerating 1% of your maximum life per second while a supported skill is active. Honestly, my paranoid self wants to put this in time of need, since when you activate this, it is a constant, buff. It shows up and it's there all the time. So it makes me wonder if Berserk, I don't see a buff icon for this, so I'm not sure if Vitality is only active when you have rage buffs or something. I don't think that's how it works. I'm pretty sure this is up all the time, but, whenever I get a perfect Jeweler's Orb into this thing, I'm probably going to move it over just because, I'm paranoid like that. And that's going to wrap it up for the skills. This combination has honestly felt great to me. Again, mostly for maps I find myself darting around and clearing with shield charge best I can, while cleaning up the rest of the things with Magma Barrier and Resonating Shield. It's felt really good and really efficient. I just wish warriors had a better mobility option, but hey, shield charge ain't bad for getting around, so we'll make do. Alright, up next is the passive skill tree, which has undergone a bit of a facelift, but it shouldn't be too expensive to pivot to. Let's take a look. Alright guys, we're going to go over the gear in the next section, but it is mostly due to the items I am now wearing that called for such a big revamp in the passive skill tree. Real quick, I'll go over the Ascendancy. I opted not to go Smith's Masterwork, as you can see here, but I instead grabbed Against the Anvil for Temper Weapon and this juicy 20% increased melee damage node. Trust me, I know how strong Smith's Masterwork is, but I saw potential in Temper Weapon, and honestly I've really been enjoying how it works with Resonating Shield. It's been feeling really effective. And obviously fire resistance into Forged in Flame, helps us become a legit elemental damage tank. Pretty much the reasoning there, since we are cranking up maximum fire resistance alongside the other ones with our gear and the Unnatural Resilience notable passive. This just makes sense because it loosens up the strictness and endgame itemization and speccing. Alright, so to start things off, we should talk about where the majority of our damage is coming from now, and as you see, we've journeyed all the way down here to grab these block chance nodes, and obviously the shield damage node just before Lay's Siege, which is honestly a super strong notable passive for any shield warrior build. Again, you're going to be getting more damage as you stack block chance, which is something you should be stacking until you hit block chance cap. But what we're now interested in is this cluster of nodes over here and this branch of nodes down here. Why is that? Basically, these nodes amplify our damage by a huge amount, but only against enemies that are low on life, as you can see here. Huge numbers, really strong effects. Damage with hits is lucky against enemies that are low on life, 30% damage in one node, 30% damage in one node, but again, only against enemies that are low on life. How useful is that really? Again, we're going to go over my gear in the next section, but I don't see how we can put off talking about the deepest tower any longer at this point. This is the unique helmet I've been hinting at since the beginning of this video and during the skills section when I was talking about the execute gem. This makes all enemies in our presence count as having low life, even if they aren't currently low life. So these nodes are now just active all the time, as long as enemies are within your presence, and we'll talk about that a bit more in the next section, but yeah, that's a lot of damage. You can see it feels really efficient per skill point. You're getting 30% damage for one here, 30% damage, the lucky effect we just went over, 30% more damage, 30% more damage, 60% damage and 30% stun buildup, 30% damage. They're all really strong. And then over here we have this small branch, again, two 30% damage nodes, but then this whopping 120% increased damage node. It's all really good. But yeah, I had to shift some points around, obviously, like these area of effect nodes we had before. I didn't really need these because Trampletoes is just doing so much work even without them. And then we had the fire exposure node down here, on heavy stun. We don't really need that either. Hopefully my camera's not blocking it. But yeah, the fire exposure node down here, we don't really need that since Flammability is now inflicting that. And we also have spec'd out of these maximum fire resistance and maximum all node, just because we're getting all of this from down here, Unnatural Resilience. If you're stacking enough fire resistance, it doesn't feel super efficient to really spec into these points, as I hinted at in the last video. We are keeping magnitude of ignite nodes within reason. I know you could probably see that I spec'd out of this cluster over here. It's just so close to being efficient, but I can't justify spending an extra point on this pathing node here, and then just having to spend 2 points here and here before getting the notable passive. And this node is just pure fire penetration, which isn't the most efficient thing to stack either. It's just a bit messy. I felt like I could use these 4 points better elsewhere. But yeah, I mean, these 4 are going over here. I don't think increased chance to ignite is also very good to stack, but I do like this chunky 25% increased magnitude of ignite here and the bit of strength it gives us, so that's the reasoning there. And since we're already here, it makes sense to travel all the way up here to grab these nodes, you know, these really useful block nodes. This one has a huge increase to block chance, 30% chance, and then more block, offensive stance, which is essentially another laze siege, so we're getting, you know, double value out of that effect. But also we are grabbing these energy shield and armor nodes. Obviously you can probably tell by the way my health globe looks down there that we've picked up some hybrid pieces, and these feel really good to spec into. It feels super efficient somehow, knowing that you're getting more armor and energy shield out of each. And I mean, energy shield just feels like you're increasing your life total in a way, so these are basically like armor and life nodes to me, which is great. And these 2 notable passives are actually really strong with minimal investment. You know, this one will increase your energy shield recharge rate based on your armor, which is something we're obviously stacking, and this one is juicing up our chest piece quite a bit. So try to find a chest piece that is, you know, that has a strong energy shield and armor roll, just to get the most value out of this thing. And on that note, we've thrown some points over here for more of the same energy shield and armor, but also reinforced barrier, increasing our energy shield by 20% and allowing us to defend with 120% of our armor while not on low energy shield. So this basically means, if I understand this correctly, that we have a significantly higher armor rating as long as our energy shield isn't low or empty, which is honestly good. That, you know, that can help out with some of those initial heavy hits from mobs. And we're right in the neighborhood since we're using some of the nodes down here. You can see I spec'd out of some of these for some of those low life nodes, but yeah, we're still in the neighborhood, so it made sense to just pick these up. Oh, and real quick, people always ask me about gems. Really, I think you just get gems that kind of fit whatever you need in the moment. If you need more block chance, you should prioritize rubies with block chance. Anything with fire damage or elemental damage is also going to be really good, or armor even. It kind of depends on what you need defensively. But as far as like the more expensive ones, honestly, I have my eyes set on the one that gives you more skill. Obviously, if you can stack more shield charge skill, it's going to hit a lot harder. So that's probably going to be the most expensive gem that I actually look for and buy. But for right now, it's kind of whatever you need. You know, fire damage is good, block chance is good, armor is good, even rage on when you're hit by enemies is good, etc. And in my fondest dreams, I would have enough points to shift around without sacrificing too much damage to journey all the way up here and grab these energy shield and armor nodes into this notable passive. Huge chunk of the same, but also move speed. I experimented around with it earlier and it honestly feels great. Really boosts up your tankiness even more, and you actually feel that small 3% move speed difference. But I found that I was sacrificing just a bit too much damage to get there, so maybe sometime in the future, you know, when I have more god roll items. Oh, and one more thing people always ask me about is my anointment on my amulet. I am currently saving up enough to purchase this one all the way up here, Volcanic Skin. It's a little bit of a pricier one, but it gives you, 20% fire resistance, which is good for our build, but also the gain 8% of damage as extra fire damage is actually a lot. Whenever you gain a percentage of damage as a certain type of damage, it's way more significant than just, increased percentage of damage. I'm not exactly sure of how the math works out. I'll have to get back to you on that, but I've noticed this across the board. If you gain a percentage of something as damage, it's a huge significant difference. But yeah, as always, the passive skill tree will be linked in the description box below to view at your own leisure, so check that out if you want to. For now, you can see all the gems and all the points everywhere that I've chosen, but for now it's time to look at the gear. Alright, gear's looking pretty good overall. I'd still change a couple things, but real quick, let me just mouse over each piece so that you can see what I'm using here. Pretty good overall. This breach ring could be a little bit better. I'm pretty happy with this one. Chest piece, gloves, Trampletoes, obviously. I think the belt is currently my worst piece just because, only one charm slot, and the rolls are okay, the max life is good, but it could definitely be better. So that's the worst piece out of the bunch, but that's currently what the set is looking like. And yep, we've already talked about the deepest tower, but let's just highlight it real quick. We've already gone over its effect, and you can see our presence here. If we highlight this, you can see that green circle around my character. Oop, hold on. Yeah, let's do that. So that is our presence radius. So one of the biggest downsides of this helmet is the 50% reduced presence area of effect, but as you can see here as a warrior, it's honestly not too bad. Again, pretty much everything we do as this class is going to be within this radius, so this supposed downside has almost no noticeable effect on us, at least with this build. I think maybe the outermost portion, of the resonating shield shockwave might travel further than this, but that's really not the thing that's doing our damage. And even though we're not grabbing this thing for the defensive stats, they're not the worst, honestly. A bit of life and some chaos resist, which is valuable. A higher roll on chaos resist is probably what's going to drive the price up for you. But this happens to be a Spirit Bone Crown, which is armor and energy shield, something we've pivoted into in the passive skill tree, so that works out nicely. I think I picked this one up for 80 exalted or so this will cost you a bit, but I honestly wouldn't say it's expensive by any means. I didn't even drop a div on this thing, so I'm totally cool with the rolls on it. And real quick, this is optional, but I do recommend it. You can see here that I have an extra pair of boots in my inventory with some pretty good defensive stats and a good move speed roll. This is here, and I actually take these along with me for Pinnacle boss fights and other situations where I want some extra move speed or defensives, like certain trials of Secamus rooms or chaos rooms, etc. Even on maps, honestly, just if there's a lot of downtime or if I have to backtrack in any way, I just slap these on and I get that huge move speed boost. It feels really good. And it really puts a spotlight on the fact that Trampletoes has a pretty bad move speed roll, but again, this is optional, yet I do recommend it because Trampletoes has an absolutely god tier effect when it comes to clearing enemies on maps, but it honestly is pretty much useless against bosses or when traveling, so I think it makes sense to invest in a decent pair of boots that you can swap out when you are not interested, in clearing a huge group of enemies. Trust me, I know that's what most of this game is, but you'll really appreciate the extra move speed and defense against bosses and otherwise. I usually do all my support gem swapping and boot swapping while I am channeling temper weapon, so all this prep work feels like it works out, it all can overlap. I'm honestly really glad that you can do all this while using temper weapon, and I rebound my inventory hotkey to Z, something a little more accessible so that it's easier to swap to the boots whenever I just want a quick move speed boost or something like that. It doesn't actually feel that much extra and you get used to it pretty quickly. It just, becomes programmed in your muscle memory after a while. Speaking of temper weapon, this skill converts 100% of your weapon's physical damage into fire damage. I'm not sure if any of the elemental damage rolls apply to this. My guess is that they do, but don't quote me on that. I'm not totally sure. But this means that you want a chonky, high physical damage roll weapon alongside the usuals, elemental damage with attacks, +5 melee weapon skill, etc. Honestly, those two rolls I mentioned are still the most important, but if you want more value out of your temper weapon as you're clearing, you'll want some extra physical damage on your weapon since it'll boost up the damage of temper weapon directly. So try to aim for that. I know that things will get in the pricier range at some point, but I got mine for fairly cheap, and I think I even, not even a divine, and then I got lucky with the corruption, so it's likely worth a bit more now. But yeah, it's important to stack plus melee skill where you can, obviously on the weapon here, and then you can get +2 on the gloves here. I got +2 on the amulet here. This can actually roll up to +3, but that gets in the pricier range, obviously. Stacking fire resistance all over the place wherever possible, since that's the one stat we need for all of our resistances now. And I've socketed things for the most part with greater iron runes, just aside from the weapon, obviously, since this has soul cores of Citacolatl. Still can't pronounce that, but that's just to boost up the elemental damage with pretty much everything we do. Again, you can take a look at the path of building link down below if you want to review this at any time in your browser or whatever, so just click that for the gear, passive skill tree, skills and support gems, etc. Oh, and obviously let's talk about the shield, the most important part of this build, honestly. I almost ended the video without doing so, but yeah, as far as what to look for in a shield, obviously it's just higher armor rating. The higher the armor rating of the shield, the harder resonating shield, magma barrier, and most importantly shield charge are gonna hit. All of those obviously scale very strongly with plus skill gem level, but you also want as much armor as you can on the shield, so you want to run like a tower shield of some kind, and as a Smith of Kitava warrior, you'd probably want some fire resistance on there, and then from there it's basically dealer's choice, though I think some of the better rolls are going to be additional physical damage reduction and block chance. The shield I'm using here actually corrupted away 200 armor. This used to be a 1.2k armor shield, but now it's around 1k, which is fine. I needed the extra block chance anyway, which is what the Vol Orb got me. But yeah, this costed me about a div at first, I think. If you're looking at the 1.2k armor range, however, you know, with decent rolls, you're probably going to be spending around 4 divs or more. And then the 1.4k armor tier, you're getting to like 15 divs plus. So this is definitely going to be the most expensive part of your build if you want a heavy hitter. And that's the build update, guys. I'm honestly very confident in pushing this higher. Right now, I'm hitting the lower and mid-tier Pinnacle boss fights, and they're all feeling like a breeze. Simulacrums are interesting. I'll talk about that in 1 second, but honestly, I'm excited to just take this all the way. I'll likely adjust it one last time at some point. I feel like I need the extra armor and energy shield, honestly, as I pointed out on the skill tree, but only if I feel like I have enough damage. So right now, I'm just farming and shopping for upgrades as I push the end game further and further. If I had to point out a weakness of this build, it's gotta be the heavy stun buildup. Again, especially during crowded events like rituals and simulacrums, keep a very close eye on that stun meter. You really do not want to get heavy stunned, as it will usually not turn out well for you. I mean, it's survivable sometimes if you have a decent utility belt and an instant heal flask. You might be able to spam your way through it until you get up, but again, that's a position you want to avoid at all costs. What I recommend here is getting used to that Magma Barrier shield charge timing. Again, you don't suffer any stun buildup while blocking and using shield charge, so it's one of the safer ways to clear mobs while blocking at the same time. Just make sure you are positioned correctly and that you are animation canceling so that you can reposition as quickly as possible. Anyways, that's going to be it for this one. Stick around for some gameplay clips of me using this build in various endgame situations, and I'll see you guys in the next one.
To finish the rally! Who are you to overthrow your fate? Come get me! Invasive growth. Wildwood's power is mine! Try another soul. This will make a difference.